the sermon is going to be from you today. The bishop and annual conference have requested that we observe today as Immigration Sunday, and I hope you'll see where that kind of fits in with Epiphany later. It's important for us to do this so we can place current events in the context of our faith. Welcoming strangers is a biblical mandate. In Leviticus, the scholar wrote, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt." The United Methodist Church's social principles state, "We recognize, embrace, and affirm all persons, regardless of country of origin, as members of the family of God. We affirm the right of all persons to equal opportunities for employment, access to housing, health care, education, and freedom from social discrimination. We urge the church and society to recognize the gifts, contributions, and struggles of those who are immigrants, and to advocate justice for all." People who cross the U.S. borders coming into our country willingly or unwillingly often do not know what awaits them here, thinking it's better than staying in their own countries. For some of us, it's a struggle to understand that desperation. But does that mean we throw open the borders to anyone who wants to come and seek asylum? No. Even though the mother in me wants to gather everybody together under my arms, that's not a feasible thing to do. It does mean, however, that we're called to treat humanely everyone and anyone whom we encounter until their pleas have been heard, because that's the law. Everyone has a chance to state their case for asylum. Human beings have always moved from one place to another, and freedom to move is so precious that it is a protected human right. Immigration is when a person freely chooses to move. It might be temporary or permanent. Immigrants often move to resettle as a family, to fulfill a job placement, or as a reprieve from situations of injustice and war. But not all movements are chosen freely. Some people, including whole families and communities, have been forced to move. Some have been forced to move because of human trafficking, a modern-day form of slavery. Some are forced out because of war, and some flee to save their children from being abducted by gangs or soldiers. Nearly 1% of the world's population is affected by forced displacement. It's a crisis of global proportions and immense moral and ethical implications. Forced migration in all its forms is a denial of human dignity and a violation of human rights. Again, reading from the United Methodist Social Principles, resource inequality and the unequal development of nations have caused massive displacement and forced migration. In order to provide basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, education, health care, and other necessities, ways must be found to share more equitably the resources of the world. You've heard the term radical hospitality, and hopefully you have, because that's rooted in our biblical understanding of God's abundant love and provision. It helps us to imagine a world of plenty rather than scarcity, a world of welcome rather than fear. So what does that mean for us? I think it means we need to support people who are fleeing homelands voluntarily, as well as those who are being forced out. I believe we Christians have overlooked the people God used in our faith story, and how a great deal of them were actually refugees. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has said that a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. With those three components in mind, I want to take a quick look at a few biblical figures who were forcibly displaced. A lot of us know Jacob, who was later called Israel, is the guy who ended up having 12 sons. However, when he was a young man, he had a major feud with his brother Esau. Perhaps you remember the story where he took Esau's blessing. He was the second born, and Esau should have had the family blessing, but as his father was dying, he snuck around and took it. And then his mother told him he better skedaddle because Esau was going to kill him if he stayed. So Jacob's first situation falls into the violence category of our definition of refugee. Many years later, Jacob became a refugee again. Back to those 12 sons, Jacob, dumb man that he was, had a favorite. And the other brothers didn't like him. They sold him into slavery. Joseph ended up in Egypt and became second in command of Pharaoh. And because of his understanding and interpretation of dreams, he saved not only Egypt from famine, but the Israelites who left hunger behind and went to Egypt. They ended up selling possessions to buy food and sold themselves into servitude. So hunger forced our ancestors into slavery in Egypt. And another example of a refugee in the Bible is found in the story of Moses. You remember Moses left Egypt to go to Midian, fearing that the Egyptians might kill him. Later, however, he returned to the nation to save the Israelites from Pharaoh's oppression. They left and they traveled for 40 years in the wilderness until coming to the Promised Land. All of the Jews, including Jesus, would later stem from these Israelites, these folks who escaped persecution, which fits the definition of refugee. Just one more example of a refugee. Can you put it together with the Epiphany story? And it's Jesus. If you will remember, this is the part from Matthew, after the Magi leave, they sneak away because they don't want to go and tell Herod where Jesus is. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Arise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." Then he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed for Egypt. Jesus was forcibly displaced. To escape the wrath of Herod, Joseph and Mary took their child and fled to Egypt. When he was a child, he and his family relocated for safety, just like many people today. Well, the Bible features tons of other figures fleeing from their lands, many because of situations like natural disasters. However, there are a few main people who were forcibly displaced because of persecution, war, and violence. So how should knowing about these figures change the way we look at the refugee crisis? First of all, it reminds us that this issue isn't new. Throughout history, people have been fleeing their lands for safety. It doesn't make it any less painful for those traveling or any less confusing for onlookers. However, God's seen this thousands of times. God's dealt with this before and calls us to help. Later on in Matthew, Jesus says, "I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in." Jesus stated this in a parable during his ministry. And I hope that knowing that he was once a refugee changes how we view that. This wasn't said by someone who hadn't experienced the refugee crisis firsthand, but he had experienced it firsthand. This was said by the Son of God. So clearly, our biblical mandate is to care for one another. This command supersedes politics and ideologies. It is a clarion call from the one who created us to care for each other. It is a call for compassion for those whose lives are unimaginable to us. So while our government decides what to do with people who show up at the border, we have the most important task: love. And this is how we love. We care, feed, visit, clothe, welcome, and pray. Amen. I invite you to join me as we join together at God's table, a reminder that this table does not belong to Stowe United Methodist Church. It doesn't belong to the United Methodist Church. It is open to all God's people. So we invite everyone to come as part of this service.